if we keep doing things the same way we've been doing them, we're going to keep having the same results. And the results we're having right now from an environmental and a climate point of view are just not acceptable when we think about our kids and our grandkids in the future, right? It's Einstein's definition of insanity, right? So we have to change how we do it. And so we start there. We're constantly sharing best practices that we've learned from other firms as we've gone on this journey. We have customer groups that get together and talk about this. And as more and more people catch on to this new way of doing design, and we start to see the results, better outcomes, faster design cycles, freeing up that time that we all need, then it really starts to kind of snowball and build on itself.
What is the difference between generative design and generative AI? And why is it important that we understand this? Welcome to the Care to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Corsetti. Today, we'll answer that important question as we have the privilege of speaking with Ari Raivetz, CEO of Transcend Software. Ari has an impressive background in the tech industry, particularly in harnessing the power of generative design using AI to drive innovation. Under his leadership, Transcend is revolutionizing how industries approach AI and its applications. Ari, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we're so excited. Can you start by telling us a bit about your journey and what led you to become the CEO of Transcend?
Sure. So I have about 20 years of experience in water, energy, and infrastructure broadly. I started as an equity analyst covering oil and gas companies on kind of the more traditional side of the energy industry. And then I moved to the clean tech side after kind of seeing what happens with oil and gas and how that's impacting the environment and the planet. And was a clean tech venture capital investor for a while and ended up investing in a water engineering business that had a very unique technology for recycling wastewater. Just curious, Cynthia, have you ever been to a wastewater treatment facility?
I have not.
Okay. You can probably imagine it's not really the most pleasant place to visit, pretty smelly, pretty ugly kind of place. And this company that I was the CEO of for 9 years, Organica Water, has a technology for treating wastewater in a beautiful odor-free botanical garden. So it doesn't look like a wastewater plant. You know, you can put it right in the middle of a city or a community and actually recycle the wastewater economically instead of just talking about it on a PowerPoint slide. But then, nobody wants to live near a smelly wastewater plant. So
yeah, that's what I will say. While I haven't toured one or been in one, I've actually driven by them and definitely can smell.
They're usually far from people, and it makes it really difficult to recycle economically. So this company was based in Europe, and I moved from the US to Europe with my family, and I get there. They have this wonderful technology for treating wastewater, and they had to get it out to the world. And I learned that it was an incredibly labor-intensive process to do that. It was taking 500 hours and over a month for a cross-functional team of engineers, process, chemical, mechanical, electrical, civil engineers, just to do a design so they could show this technology to somebody who might want to buy it and implement it. I was taking over a month to get back to a customer when they were interested. And so that kind of led me to hire some software developers and build a platform that automated the preliminary design, in this case for that particular kind of wastewater treatment facility. And long story short, it really helped Organica grow very quickly. Company went from doing about 10 bids per year with 15 people before the software to 300 bids per year. And, over a period of 4 years, it grew to 150 people. They were implementing this sustainable wastewater technology on 5 continents. And then about 5 years ago, together with Adam Tank, my co-founder at Transcend, we said, can we spin the software out and take the same concept of generative design and apply it broadly to the infrastructure industry where, we know we need to build a new kind of sustainable infrastructure and green electric grid to deal with climate change. So that's the short version of how Transcend got to be here today.
That's exciting. How large is the company, and where's it headed as far as size and
So we were just 15 people when we spun out, and that was in December of 2019. It's kind of an interesting time to start a business. 2 months later, we were all locked in our houses for a couple of years. So that was a fun first year. But today we're 120 people. We work with a lot of the leading utilities, both power and electric utilities, engineering consultants who design infrastructure, and then technology suppliers who, I always say those are the people that are saving the world. They're the ones who are innovating and trying to find these new technologies to do things more sustainably. So our customer base is kind of split across all three of those groups, and we're helping all of them design faster and more intelligently so that we can get to better outcomes.
Oh, that's great. So in the article in Authority Magazine, you discuss the nuanced difference between generative design and generative AI. Can you elaborate on this for our listeners?
Sure. So generative design is very, very different than generative AI. When we think of generative AI, we think of ChatGPT. So you ask ChatGPT a question, and it gives you an answer based on a very, very sophisticated pattern recognition. And if you ask it the same question, again, it might give you a different answer. Sometimes it hallucinates. It's indeterministic. It's based on a pattern. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to drive over a bridge that was designed by an indeterministic model. I would want to drive over a bridge where the structural engineering calculation for that bridge was done by the same mathematics that's been used for hundreds of years to design a bridge. That is a deterministic calculation. So generative design uses a structured set of rules and calculations to automatically generate preliminary design or detailed engineering documents. It might use generative AI within that process to actually optimize certain things, like where you put things on a site or where you put things on a building or which technology to choose. But the actual mathematics behind it is real engineering calculations that are deterministic. A good way to think about it is with generative design, you could ask a computer to design an apple for you, and you would have to give it some parameters, how big should the apple be? What color should it be? Maybe the density. And then it will design an apple for you, a 3D model of an apple. If you ask a computer using generative AI to design an apple, you might get a Mac. You might get a laptop. So that's one example I always use when kind of trying to highlight the difference between the two.
Okay, that's interesting, and it's vital information for people to know. What I like in what you just said is it really is utilizing advanced skills of engineers. So when people start to think about, job security because of AI and so on, this kind of puts that to rest a little bit, the worries to rest.
I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges we deal with every day when we're selling and implementing the software for engineering firms. People are worried about, is this going to take my job? And, I always point to the fact that, and you can go back to, 1930, and there were only a couple of licensed engineering disciplines. And, fast forward to today, there's over 16 recognized engineering disciplines. If you look at projections for the number of engineers in the world, it's going to keep growing. There's going to be a lot more engineers in the world 50 years from now than there are today. What generative design really allows an engineer to do is use their time more efficiently so that they can really solve problems that, frankly, the world needs to solve. And, I always think of the engineers as like, these are the people who are going to ultimately save the planet for us. They're the ones who can solve these really difficult climate problems that we've created for ourselves, but they need to be given the time and the resources to do that. And when you talk to an engineer today, and we did a survey of over 100 engineers, 93% said they just don't have enough time to do all the work they would like to do. They talk about the 40 hours per week that they work. for build time and then the extra 40 hours that they have to work to really get everything done. There's just not enough time for them. So this allows them to really focus on the problems that matter and not spend time on less value-added tasks. And that's really what technology has done, if you look back over 100 years. So,
well, yeah, there's two things that are valid in what you just said. First of all, every industry, and working as an executive coach in multiple industries, that's the biggest thing you hear is aren't enough hours in the day to solve my problems. But my background in executive leadership was in an engineering firm. And one of the things I've learned about engineers, and not just engineers, so I don't want to sound like I'm making this blanket statement, but a lot of professionals in multiple industries, and engineering one of them, sometimes change is challenging. Like they see the benefit, they see the value. They also like the way things have been done. So what are you doing to help combat that and help people embrace the change?
So when you say embrace change, it's actually one of our core values at Transcend that we talk about. And when we're hiring, it's what we look for. We also talk about that we don't really have customers here. We have partners. Our clients are on this journey together with us, and we're figuring out together, we're thinking together around, how do we solve this problem more efficiently than we have in the past? It's a pretty obvious fact, I think, that if we keep doing things the same way we've been doing them, we're going to keep having the same results. And the results we're having right now from an environmental and a climate point of view are just not acceptable when we think about our kids and our grandkids in the future, right? So, it's Einstein's definition of insanity, right? You do the same thing over and over again. You should expect the same result. If you expect a different result, you're insane. So we have to change how we do it. And so we start there. We have a very high touch process with our clients from an onboarding and a learning perspective. We're constantly sharing best practices that we've learned from other firms as we've gone on this journey. And we have customer groups that get together and talk about this. And, as more and more people kind of catch on to this new way of doing design, and we start to see the results, better outcomes, faster design cycles, freeing up that time that we all need, then it really starts to kind of snowball and build on itself.
So that brings me to the topic of leadership. In your opinion, what qualities are essential for leaders in industries like this that are embracing this change?
So the first thing I think about is persistence. And this is not going to be easy. This is hard to do. Change is hard. People are afraid of change. And we have to be resilient and committed to make this kind of change happen. So I think, being persistent and resilient, being able to bounce back when you have roadblocks is probably the single most important leadership skill when it comes to driving this kind of transformation in a business. I think being humble is also really important. There's a lot we don't know. And we say all the time, nobody's ever built a generative design business for critical infrastructure before. We're the first ones doing this. So you have to know what you don't know and be humble enough, be an active listener, be able to take feedback, be able to admit when you don't know something or you're wrong and you have to change your course. I think that's a key part of, implementing this kind of change. And then the other aspect that is, I think, really important is valuing time above all else. Being very focused and disciplined about how we use our time, because it's truly the one scarce resource, right? You can't create more time. So I'm very careful about how I use my time. And it's something that culturally in the company, we, promote across all teams, and trying to be as efficient as possible with your time, gets you to the outcomes you want faster. So those would be kind of three areas of leadership that I think are really important when it comes to implementing this kind of change.
And in your experience leading your organization, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that you face in the realm of leadership?
Generally, most of the challenges for companies at our stage of development are people-oriented, right? It's going to be about people ultimately our success or not success as a company isn't going to be driven by me or the industry or competitive dynamics or the market. It's going to be the team, right? This is a team sport. Best team wins. How that team responds to the uncertainty and to whatever the market throws at it is, really the biggest determinant of our success as a company. And so, when I think about the types of challenges that we have to overcome, it's about how do you get engineers who have designed stuff in the same way for their whole career. And we have a team of 30 engineers at Transcend who spent their career outside of software designing water treatment or power plants or, different kinds of critical infrastructure. How do you get them to work with software developers who have a very different kind of mentality? Getting those two groups to work together is certainly our biggest challenge and has been a big part of the journey. And, we continue to experiment with different ways to integrate those two ways of thinking to get them to coalesce around the ultimate objectives that we have as a company. And I think, having that grounding of we're actually doing this for a reason. We're not just doing this because we want to grow a software business, but we're doing this because if the world changes the way it designs things, then we have an opportunity to address climate change and create a better future for, the next generations. That common goal has been something that, we look for in hiring and that when there's conflicts, can use to help resolve those conflicts.
It's interesting that you say what you say, because as I said, my background, I was a vice president in an engineering firm, and I was vice president of HR. And I learned very quickly that the engineers, a lot of them think differently than your typical HR person. One of the things I'm very big on is understanding personalities and personality profiles. So we did the Myers-Briggs with the entire organization, and I found out that while I was off the charts on ENFP, which is really emotional and, that gut instinct, they were off the charts in ISTJ, which was very fact-driven and very just black and white. They needed evidence of everything. And I was like, no, trust me, it's my gut instinct. And one example, I think I learned very, very quickly. It was one of my first interactions with this entire group of engineers as the new VP of HR, and I wanted to make a really good impression. So it was this big meeting that had everyone in, and I was going to do an exercise with them because I'm a coach. We've always done exercises and challenges and so on. So I had them all in this room, and it was a listening exercise to explain how what we hear isn't necessarily the same for everybody. So it was an exercise where one person would stand in front of the room and they would have this design on a piece of paper, and they had to describe to 100 people in the audience how to draw this design. And I had done this thing hundreds of times in the past, but I've never done it with engineers. And it was so interesting because the person standing up front said, put your pencil at exactly 32 degrees, tilting right, go up. And I was, oh my God, this was an epic fail because everyone in the room had the exact same design. And it was like, well, welcome to the world of engineers. So it was a learning process for me. And that's when I really dove in and learned that to communicate with them, I have to communicate with them on their level. And that means I needed more spreadsheets and more factual black and white so they can see it, touch it, feel it, and understand it.
We've developed a lot of those. We've had similar experiences and a lot of learning, and it's a 10-year-old software platform. So we've had engineers and software developers working on it, even before Transcend was created, before it was spun out. It's been a huge journey of learning, finding ways that they can communicate on the same level with one another, creating business processes and documentation so that what the engineer has in their mind, literally, how you draw this particular thing can be communicated to the software developer. And then, it's really like with most things, it's about meeting in the middle, right? So getting the engineers to bend a little bit and then getting the software developers to move more towards structure. And, where you find that happy medium between the two, And we do a lot of company culture activities, things like Minecraft, and we have all kinds of contests. And it's kind of an artifact from being started during COVID. We just built up this huge culture of remote team building activities, and we just continued it even after, people were in person. So
that's awesome. So what are some of the ethical considerations that leaders need to keep in mind when implementing new solutions?
So this is actually another big difference between generative AI and generative design. And I think with generative AI, we get into a lot of these ethical considerations because of the unpredictability of what the AI might do. Mm-hmm. Generative design doesn't have that unpredictability when it comes to the specific outcome, for all those reasons that I mentioned before, because it's more deterministic, because it's based on an actual rules-based procedure. Generative AI is generally a black box. So you don't know how it got to the answer. It can't tell you how it got to the answer. And if you ask it to get to the answer again, it's going to give you a different answer. One of the ways that we've tried to address this is with generative design is making it a white box. So our software is pretty simple. You enter data about a project in a web-based platform. It takes 10 or 15 minutes to enter, the main criteria for designing that piece of infrastructure. And after you hit a button, it goes to the cloud and it generates all these engineering documents and drawings. So essentially a preliminary design for that facility. One of those outputs is a document which is essentially a white box. So it tells the user, these are the decisions that were made. These are the equations that were used. This is how that particular pump was sized or the breaker was sized. This is the spacing and the clearance between, the structure and the road, or between two electrical items in the substation. So with that information, you can build trust and you have less of the kind of ethical considerations that you typically, think about with generative AI.
If someone were to ask you if you've made any mistakes along the way of growing this company, what would be one of the mistakes you would share, and what did you learn from it?
It's interesting. I mean, we make mistakes every single day. So it's hard to pick one. I always say, you either win or you learn, right? So like every time we're making a mistake, we're learning from that and we're getting better from doing it. We have a culture of experimentation here. That's something that has been harder for the engineers to accept because, if you're trained to design.
Right. They're risk averse.
And if you're trained to design a bridge, we're a wastewater plant with waterproof concrete structure, and you're doing that math, like there's no room for experimentation there. If there is, it's only on the adding safety margin side of things, not adding risk. So we've experimented with a lot of different structures for how the engineers and the software developers work together in an organization, both organizational structures as well as kind of functional team planning structures. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't. That's probably been the biggest area. I always say when it comes to startups that like some of the biggest mistakes you make are the hires that you make, which may not be a fit for the culture. So we try to be really careful about that and, hire for culture more than just a resume or a background, and find people that are going to fit into the culture so that, it kind of contributes to the whole as opposed to just an individual skill set.
Yeah, honestly, you can teach skills, but you cannot teach the mojo. You can't teach that. They're either going to fit or they're not going to fit.
And you can imagine there's so much change going on with us, with our customers, that you need people that can live in that world.
And sometimes when it fits in at a certain point in your organization, sometimes the organization outgrows that fit. And you just have to be aware and conscientious enough to notice that. Okay, I'm going to ask you a more personal question. What is something that our listeners would find interesting to know about you as a person that they might not see just in your professional portfolio, in your professional life?
Well, I lived in Budapest, Hungary for 4 years, so that's interesting. When I left the venture capital world, I was living in New York, my wife and our twin daughters. My girls were 3 years old at the time, and I had this opportunity to leave and go run this engineering business in Budapest. And so we just kind of one day packed up from New York City, moved to Hungary, got an apartment, got all of our furniture and everything from IKEA. Like we furnished the whole thing in one shopping trip to IKEA. And, I was off to run this business, and Lauren and my daughter, Sydney and Lila, were figuring out how to live in Hungary. So that might be something interesting. Another fact, which is kind of a bit related, and the reason that I do Transcend and what I did before when I moved to Hungary, the company was called Organic Water that I ran, is when I was an oil and gas analyst, it was a really transformative time in my life. I'd just gotten married, just had my daughters. I graduated from business school about 4 years before that, and had a lot of loans I had to pay back from business school. So I was working at a bank and raising money for a lot of oil and gas companies. And I was just horrified by the things that I saw as an analyst and what I was learning about what was happening to the environment that these companies were doing in the interest of, maximizing profit on a barrel of oil or MCF of natural gas. And so I made a personal decision once I paid off my loans right around the time my girls were born, that I was going to kind of be on the clean tech side, paying back my debt to the planet, because I had raised a lot of money for those companies when I worked at an investment bank. So that's why I do this every day. And I think it's a big driver for a lot of people at Transcend that, we're very mission driven. We're not just trying to automate, we're trying to automate for a reason. I
love that. And having young daughters, making sure they have a planet for their future is vitally important.
And when I was an analyst visiting those sites, it was right when fracking first started, and we were taking a lot of those companies public. And, I had these little babies at home, and it was just, thinking about their future and their kids' future. And I'm a research data-driven person. You start reading all of the data about what's happening to the planet. And, it was pretty clear what I had to do for the rest of my career. So,
well, good for you. I love that. So as we wrap things up, I want to say my listeners already know that Care to Lead is my signature leadership system, and it's built on the foundation of 4 pillars: clarity, authenticity, responsibility, and engagement. That being said, I ask all of my guests a closing question about one of the pillars. So Ari, how do you ensure clarity in your vision and communication at Transcend?
I have the benefit of having lived in Europe in a country where there weren't a ton of native English speakers for 4 years. And I made a lot of mistakes in how I communicated, where I would say one thing and I really thought it was clear, and the way that it was interpreted was completely off, and off of at least what my intention was. And when I moved back to the US and I wasn't there every day, you would do that, and then you would go visit 3 months later, and you would see how far that miscommunication had been taken. So, we take a team-based approach to communication, where we usually have multiple departments before something goes out, whether it's to the company or at a town hall meeting or in an audience with broader communication, where multiple people, usually somebody from Europe and somebody from the US, are reading it, making sure that there's kind of a clear interpretation of what those words would be. And then it's just the following up, right? And the follow through, the extra questions, the individual follow-ups to make sure that the message was clear. It's a lot of work. It really is, in a remote environment and in a multicultural one, but it's worth it, because those miscommunications can be taken very far if they're not addressed right away.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% in agreement with you. Ari, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. Your perspectives are enlightening and encouraging, and I'm glad that you're out there doing the things you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Remember, leaders who care to lead. Until next time.